Before leaving home, Jack writes a letter explaining his plan. His sister Lily has been struggling with mental health issues ever since their mother passed away. At one point, she even attempted to take her own life, but Jack saved her just in time. Jack wanted her to be treated at home under the care of their family doctor, but instead, she became a ward of the state and was sent to a mental institution where visitors aren't allowed. Desperate to help her, Jack comes up with a plan to pretend to be mentally ill so he can get into the asylum himself. He leaves the letter behind as a backup plan in case something goes wrong. To appear crazy, Jack starts by injuring himself, cutting his hair badly, and smashing a mirror. Then, he goes outside without a shirt and begins acting erratically, bumping into people, cursing, and shouting nonsense about monsters. It doesn't take long before the police arrive and pin him down while paramedics give him a sedative. Shortly after, Jack is taken to the asylum, where a guard named Charles carries him on a stretcher to meet Dr. Giannetti. Even though the sedative makes him feel dizzy, Jack keeps muttering nonsense to maintain his act. Giannetti quickly determines that Jack needs to be placed in maximum security, and Charles escorts him to a special hallway where dangerous inmates are kept in cells. Charles straps Jack to his bed and warns him about one of his neighbors, a notorious criminal named Mark who killed multiple girls. As Charles is leaving, he notices that Mark is vomiting blood and enters the cell to help. Mark suddenly reveals he has a hidden blade, and Jack yells a warning just in time. Charles manages to defend himself and lock the cell again before leaving. Mark, furious that Jack ruined his escape attempt, starts shouting, and this sets off the rest of the inmates, who begin screaming too. A waiter, Dr. Giannetti, comes to check on Jack and decides he's calm enough to be moved to the psychiatric ward. Charles takes Jack to the ward, and Giannetti approaches Mark, mentioning a treatment called orphium. Giannetti gently touches Mark's head to keep him subdued. At the psychiatric ward, a nurse named Nancy asks Jack to wait while she finishes his paperwork. While she's away, Jack starts looking at the other patients. He approaches a woman, thinking it's Lily, but it turns out to be another patient named Heather, who is friendly and gives him a piece of paper. Suddenly, Heather begins screaming, accusing Jack of trying to take advantage of her. Nancy rushes back and threatens to send Heather upstairs if she doesn't calm down. After that, Nancy shows Jack around and explains the rules, but suddenly a patient named Loomis attacks her, choking her until she drops her panic button. Another patient, Dave, picks it up and passes it to Jack, who presses the button. Giannetti arrives quickly and, with just a few words, convinces Loomis to let go of Nancy. Charles then tases Loomis and takes him upstairs while Giannetti orders a lockdown. Nancy takes Jack to his room and he pretends to sleep. Once she's gone, Jack checks the window to see if he can escape through it. Suddenly, he hears a noise and opens the closet, finding Dave hiding inside. Dave explains he just wanted to make sure Jack doesn't have crazy eyes. Jack realizes that Mark's eyes were completely white, and Dave confirms this is a side effect of the orphium treatment. Dave also points out a glitching light on the ceiling and explains that orphium is done in a lab upstairs, where patients are treated and come back acting differently. In the lab, Dr. Giannetti is electrocuting Loomis, making him foam at the mouth. Vera, his assistant, turns off the machine and scolds him for going too far, but Giannetti insists he knows what he's doing and orders her to prepare Loomis for another dose of orphium. When Vera refuses, Giannetti loses his temper and starts explaining how orphium works, injecting Loomis himself. This makes Loomis's eyes turn white. The next day, Jack finally sees his sister, Lily, in the garden and heads to the common room to wait for her. When he approaches, Lily scolds him for coming, saying she doesn't want to be saved because she's as sick as their mother was. They argue, and Lee starts yelling, which causes a nurse to send her back to her room. Heather watches the whole scene and seems interested. Later, in the cafeteria, Jack discreetly pockets a spoon while nobody is looking. Heather comes over and asks him about Lily, then invites him to visit her room in the evening. Jack refuses and ignores her as she starts yelling. Jack sits down with Dave, and soon after, Charles joins them. Charles reminds Dave of their deal. Dave is supposed to steal some medicine for Charles, or Charles will report him. After Charles leaves, Dave asks Jack to keep his secret, promising in return that he won't tell anyone that Jack isn't actually crazy, which Dave has figured out because Jack acts sane when they're alone. The next morning, Jack attempts to use these parts to open the window, but he ends up hurting his finger. Later, during group therapy, Jack talks about his mother's illness and how she underwent multiple brain surgeries. As he talks, his hand continues to bleed, and suddenly Loomis drops to his knees, twitching as he stares at Jack's blood. The nurse tells Loomis to go back to his seat, but instead of listening, he jumps on Jack. Meanwhile, another patient with white eyes starts licking blood off the floor. Chaos breaks out as the two men fight, and the nurse tries to push her panic button. Before she can press it, Loomis bites her hand. Charles shows up and uses a taser to knock Loomis out. The nurse then orders everyone to their rooms and announces a lockdown. Jack and Dave talk afterward, realizing that Loomis was after Jack's blood. They agree that orphium isn't just a treatment. Jack later requests a meeting with Dr. Giannetti and asks him to retrieve a letter from his apartment. When they find the letter, it's mostly blank, with only a few words written. Jack becomes paranoid and accuses Giannetti of tricking him, claiming he isn't crazy. Giannetti dismisses his outburst and orders Charles to take Jack to maximum security. Jack resists, but Charles forces him to go. Other patients shout at Jack as he passes, and Mark taunts him, reminding him of his desire for revenge. Hours later, Jack starts feeling like he's truly losing his mind, and when Giannetti Giannetti checks on him. Jack pretends to be calm and apologizes for his earlier behavior. Satisfied, Giannetti allows Jack to return to the psychiatric ward. That afternoon, Jack asks Dave to teach him how to sneak around and steal medicine, as Jack wants to investigate what's really going on at Orpheum. Dave initially refuses, but later that night he changes his mind. So he shows Jack how to move stealthily through the facility, but refuses to accompany him upstairs. The two navigate the building, avoiding Charles, and sneak into an office. While Dave steals some medicine, Jack finds a security card. Just as Charles enters the room, they manage to hide. After Charles leaves, Jack uses the security card to access the upstairs area. Charles, distracted by a phone call, doesn't notice Jack sneaking around. Jack checks the solitary ward and is startled by the reactions of the patients. Eventually, he finds Lily, who apologizes for yelling at him earlier and begs for help. She claims she's witnessed the experiments happening around her. Unfortunately, Charles approaches, forcing Jack to run away. After a mad dash through several corridors, Jack arrives at Giannetti's lab. Inside, he discovers Loomis locked in a cage, trying to attack him. Shocked, Jack continues exploring and finds a bottle labeled Orpheum, which he takes along with a scalpel. Just then, he hears voices and hides. Giannetti enters the lab with Vera. They discuss how Orpheum is multiplying in the patients' bodies. Giannetti becomes aggressive and pushes Vera, tying her up. He explains that Orpheum isn't just medicine, it's nanotechnology that he's programmed to behave in a certain way. Vera argues that it's mutating and could become contagious, but Ganna dismisses her concerns and injects himself with the substance. Next, he cuts Vera's leg with a scalpel and orders her to control the mutation. The next day, Jack is visibly exhausted, and Heather teases him about not sleeping. Ignoring her, Jack shows Dave the Orpheum bottle. When the nurse comes to remove Jack's tag, he quickly hides the bottle in his fist. Jack later pulls Dave aside and asks him to steal Charles' keys so they can rescue Lily. As they're talking, a patient with wide eyes appears, holding a cat. To their horror, the man decapitates the cat and starts eating it. Jack and Dave try to that night. The nurse tells him Lily is upstairs with Giannetti, making Jack furious. He yells at the nurse and notices her wide eyes, but she assures him it's a side effect from Loomis' bite. She considers sending him upstairs, but instead locks him in his room. Meanwhile, Vera is delivering food to the patients in maximum security. Mark throws his food on the floor, saying he prefers it when his meals are alive. Later that night, Dave sneaks into Jack's room and reveals that he managed to steal Charles' keys by drugging him. The two make their way upstairs, while Lily, tied up in the lab, begs for mercy as Vera tries to feed Loomis. Vera tries to poke Loomis, who's asleep, with a stick. The stick accidentally falls, and when Vera tries to grab it back, Loomis suddenly wakes up, grabs her arm, and breaks it. He then starts sucking her blood. As Lily screams for help, Vera pulls her arm back but ends up losing it. To stop the bleeding, she ties a belt around her stump. Just then, Giannetti enters the lab and gets mad at Vera, blaming her for putting the entire experiment at risk. Vera calls him out on his behavior, but Giannetti says she didn't care when she wasn't the victim. He ties her to a bed in another room to treat her and takes a sample from her arm, confirming that the infection is spreading. This makes him happy. He leaves to find Charles but can't locate him. However, he does see Jack and Dave sneaking around on the security cameras. Giannetti tries to contact Charles, but Charles is asleep in Heather's room and she hides the radio. Meanwhile, Jack and Dave are sneaking through the maximum security hallway. Mark offers to join them, but Jack refuses. At the same time, Giannetti, in a fit of rage, causes the power to short circuit, which opens the doors to the maximum security area, allowing dangerous patients to escape. Jack fights off these patients, while Dave struggles to open a door, eventually managing to get it open. The two of them run into the next room, using Charles' taser to short-circuit the lock, which sends a shock that drives the patients back. They run again, but the patients continue chasing them. The duo reaches the lab, and Jack struggles for several minutes with the lock. Just as the patients are about to catch them, they manage to open the door and go inside, crushing one of the patient's fingers as they slam the door shut. Jack rushes to untie Lily, who confirms that Giannetti hasn't injected her yet. Meanwhile, the nurse is tending to Vera's wound, but Vera snaps and starts feeding on her own wound. Back with Jack's group, they leave the lab and head back toward maximum security to reach the stairs. The hall is covered with blood and bodies of patients who have been killed by those with white eyes. As they try to escape, they find the door at the end of the corridor seat is blocked, revealing it's a trap. Infected patients start coming out from the ceiling. Jack tries to activate the elevator by tampering with the lock's wires, while Lily and Dave fight off the patients with tasers. They manage to bring down some of the infected, but as soon as one bleeds, the other patients start feeding on them. Suddenly, Mark appears and grabs Lily, dragging her away. Dave steps in and saves her by attacking Mark. Once Jack gets the elevator working, he joins the fight and is almost killed by a patient, but Lily saves him by tasing the attacker in the mouth. The trio rushes into the elevator, but Mark grabs the door to keep it open. Jack stabs him in the chin with the scalpel, allowing the door to close. A few minutes later, they arrive at the psychiatric ward, where Jack breaks the elevator's control pad so no one can follow them. They are horrified to find blood everywhere. Jack tells Dave to protect Lily while he investigates the area. He follows a strange noise to a bedroom, where he finds Heather eating Charles' dead body. She notices Jack and starts chasing him, but he manages to push some patients in her way and punches Heather to get away. As more patients chase after him, him, Jack reunites with Lily and Dave, and they block the door before running off. In the reception area, a woman named Nancy panics and throws a chair through the glass, but when she realizes Jack's group isn't infected, she calms down and guides them to the kitchen, suggesting they grab some knives for self-defense and find an alternate exit. Suddenly, a patient attacks Jack, but he easily overpowers him, killing the patient by stabbing him in the face. More patients arrive and a brutal fight breaks out, with blood splattering everywhere as the group stabs their way through the kitchen. But after killing several patients, they reach a back door, locking it behind them before heading up the emergency stairs. Eventually, they find an office and search for a phone, but instead, they encounter the infected nurse. She tells them that Yanni is trying to find a solution, so they should just wait. She also scolds Nancy for leaving her post, but Nancy shuts her up by stabbing her. Nancy then remembers that Giannetti has a gun, so the group heads to his office. Dave takes a sword from the wall while Jack opens a drawer and finds the gun along with the letter. As they leave, they notice a trail of blood and decide to follow it. Suddenly, the nurse bursts through a door and attacks Nancy, but Lily stabs her to death. The group continues running through the recovery ward, where they find Vera. She tells them about a hidden passage in the lab and suggests using the laundry chute to avoid the stairs. Before they leave, Vera asks for euthanasia to avoid becoming a cannibal herself. Nancy gives her an injection and Vera dies. The group keeps running to avoid more incoming patients while searching for the laundry chute. Nancy opens a door, only to be attacked by an infected cleaning lady who bites her neck. Jack quickly shoots the cleaning lady and checks on Nancy, but she's already dead. Dave and Lily find the laundry chute, and they start climbing through it while Jack fends off more patients. Heather appears, and Jack tries to shoot her, but he's out of bullets. He kicks her off and climbs into the chute, with Heather following him. After a struggle, Jack manages to stab Heather, causing her to fall. The trio keeps climbing and eventually ends up in the maximum security area, where the infected patients have eaten each other. Out of nowhere, Mark blocks their path and attacks Jack with the scalpel he had before. They barely begin fighting when Lily kicks Mark away and stabs him, killing him for good. Afterward, the trio reaches the lab and finds Loomis still locked in his cage. While Jack and Lily search for the secret tunnel, Giannetti shows up and grabs Dave, slowly pushing an ice pick into his eye, performing a makeshift lobotomy. This doesn't kill Dave, but leaves his brain destroyed. Next, Giannetti strikes Jack with a lamp and tries to attack him with the ice pick, leading the siblings to team up and overpower him. During the struggle, Jack gets stabbed in the leg, but manages to grab the ice pick and stabs Giannetti. Then Lily uses a taser to knock Giannetti unconscious. When Giannetti regains consciousness, he finds himself tied to the cage, where Loomis is waiting to feed on him. Meanwhile, the siblings escape through the secret tunnel, hearing Giannetti's screams behind them. The tunnel leads them to the roof, and as they make their way down the stairs, Jack accidentally drops the orphone bottle, which shatters. By morning, they are finally outside, wandering down a road until they are found by the police. And after the siblings explain everything, the cops head to the asylum. However, Giannetti opens the door looking completely fine. Suddenly, a group of infected patients bursts out, killing the police on top of their car while the siblings watch in horror. In the end, the patients escape into the wild to spread the infection, ignoring Giannetti's desperate screams that he can help them. Subscribe for popcorn. We are racing towards 1,000 subscribers.